In this episode of Rollin with Ray, you will meet Sheri Jones, an occupational therapist who was my occupational therapist 40 years ago as I was going through a difficult time in my life. She will describe what it was like working with me. Sheri has a BSN from the University of Nebraska School of Nursing and a master's degree in occupational therapy from Texas Women's University in Denton, Texas. She has several years working with spinal cord injuries. Today, she is retired. She enjoys traveling, gardening, and is a huge Cornhusker fan. So it is my privilege and my honor to present Sheri Jones on my podcast, Rollin with Ray. Sheri, good morning.
Good morning, Ray.
Glad to have you on here. So the first question I have for you is, what made you get into becoming an occupational therapist, and what inspired you to work with spinal cord injuries?
Well, according to my mother, I wrote a paper in 8th grade about occupational therapy, but I forgot all about it and went into nursing instead. So I did a lot of bedside nursing, and then I was working at the Visiting Nurses Association, and I worked with an OT there. And I told her one day that I really wished I had done that. And she said, well, you still can, and I just laughed at her. But I worked with her with some of the patients, and I was doing what I call maintenance, the dressing changes, working with the medications, and I liked what she was doing. She was more forward looking at the future of the patient, not just how they're doing right now, and the problem-solving aspects and just getting them back to and it was just very appealing. So I went up to Denton, and next thing I knew, I was in the master's program with 2 little kids at home.
Wow, that's awesome. That's awesome.
It was fun.
So Sheri, the year is 1981, May, kind of towards the end of June. And I had just been moved from St. Paul's Hospital to Dallas Rehab Institute. So this was like my first day at DRI, which is Dallas Rehab Institute. And so I'm being introduced to my medical field of team that's going to be helping me out to adjust to my new life. I had doctors, I had nurses, I had physical therapists, respiratory therapists, behavioral medicine. They were all coming in and introducing themselves and telling me what my next 5 months of my life would be like. You happen to be my occupational therapist. So can you describe to our listeners and tell them how it is to handle newly patients? And could you also tell if I was scared or if I was lost? Because I had gone through one of the most difficult times of my life.
I wouldn't ever describe you as scared or lost. Maybe the mother in me saw a 16-year-old that I just could not imagine what you were going through. I think your background had you in a position of being comfortable in a group, and I would say apprehensive would be a good way to describe you, but not scared and lost. Kind of like, it's another football game, I'm ready for this. That might be an exaggeration.
Well, to tell you the truth, I was 16 years old, as you mentioned, and I had no idea where I was going to be going, and I felt like I was going to a nut house because I was in a room that had 5 other quadriplegics, and I didn't know what my expectations were. I didn't know what I was getting into. But you surely handled the situation well and introduced yourself, and I thought I adjusted to my new life as it was back then.
Definitely. A
good transition.
Yeah.
One of the first adjustments for quadriplegic is to get back in their chairs. So I had been in laying in bed for like 2 or 3 weeks. And so when I first got up and they sat me up in a wheelchair, I nearly passed out because I'd been laying down for 3 weeks, and all the blood flow goes to your head. And without somebody having to tilt your wheelchair back, you'll pass out if you don't do that. So how patient was it for you as far as working with newly injured quadriplegics? That I'm sure you have to be very patient, and you have to exactly know what that person is going through. Can you explain to our viewers how that works and how patiently you must be?
There's no way to really know what they're going through, but understanding is so important. And I hate to keep relying on the fact that I was older than some of the therapists and that I was a mom, but I still think it helps. And just understanding, just can you imagine what he's going through, just from your own standpoint. Because you've got to be patient and meet them where they are. If they're scared, that's okay.
Sure.
That's understandable. If they're angry, that's okay too. It's all very understandable what they're going through.
Can you describe to our viewers how many patients you had on a typical day at Dallas Rehab Institute?
In a rehab setting at that time, a typical caseload would be maybe 6 patients, but you saw each patient several times a day. You'd see them a couple times in the clinic for strengthening or hand function or activities to improve their function. Probably see them in the morning for ADL, activities of daily living, dressing, hygiene, getting ready in the morning. Might meet them in the cafeteria to help them with self-feeding if that's an issue they're having to deal with. Might do some co-treatments with physical therapy for some mat exercises. So there's several times that those 6 patients are worked into your schedule during the day. So it's a pretty full load.
I bet. I can only imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I actually lived it and saw it. So
Yeah.
I kind of knew that the occupational therapists and physical therapists, they see a lot of patients
Mm-hmm.
during those times. Can you describe to our viewers how you handle patients that are going through a depression and they're not really listening to you and they don't want to listen to you? Because you got to understand, somebody has just totally 100% changed their entire life. The life they once knew is no longer there.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you handle somebody that is depressed and going through depression?
Well, is it just they're down for the day?
Yes.
Or is it really major depression?
No, just down for the
Right.
day. They don't want to listen to
Right.
you that day.
Because if it's major depression, that's a real team effort, and the behavioral department is really involved in that. And it's
Yeah,
an
I'm
issue
talking about
that-
more like if they don't want to listen to you, that you're trying to explain them to that this is the way it's best to put on a shirt, or this is the best way to feed yourself, or this is the best
Right.
way to bathe.
Right.
How do you
Crummy
do that?
day.
Yes,
Crummy day.
just having a
Yeah.
bad day.
Maybe give them a pass.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be pushy. Or do encourage them to do some aspect of the activity that they might be willing to do, or maybe instead of doing that activity that day, you just talk about it.
Sure.
And, what do they see as what they need to work on and interested in doing?
Yeah, because when I was in the rehab, there were times where, I didn't want to listen to anybody.
Right.
But I knew that in order for me to get better, I needed to listen to those folks. And so that was quite a learning curve and a learning experience for me.
So that therapy session, I might do a little bit more of the activity for you while we talk, and
Sure. So, Sheri, one of, as you're well aware of this, but our viewers are not, is that when you're a quadriplegic, you lose control of your bowel and bladder functions. And so you have to relearn how to use all that back, and you have to program those back into your body. So there would be times that you'd be coming in at 7 in the morning, and I would have to be doing a self-catheterization to empty out my bladder, and I would basically be naked at 7 o'clock in the morning, and I'm not used to people seeing me naked. I mean, I think the only person that had ever seen me naked was my mom. How do you handle patients, and how uncomfortable that must feel when you're actually helping a patient trying to better themselves, but they're laying in that bed butt naked?
With a blanket on.
With a blanket on, sure, absolutely.
Well, you were probably damned from the beginning. First off, I'm a nurse, right?
Sure.
You know, nothing's very sacred to a nurse.
Absolutely.
So that's the first step. I'm older, I'm married, and I have kids, including a son. So I may have approached it in too casual of an attitude. My apologies many years later.
No, I want to know from your standpoint, how would you handle that when, you know, there was maybe an older person, because I was just a kid, but somebody maybe that's in their 30s or 40s, and you're having to train them all. And I guess because you've been a nurse, and you know that's just secondary. You probably don't even think of that those times now.
Yeah. Again, hopefully you've established rapport before you encounter that activity.
Sure.
You know, you're not just, this is my first therapy session, guess what we're going to work on.
Sure, absolutely.
You know, so hopefully you've established rapport, discussed it ahead of time, and gone on the patient's level of comfort,
Sure,
you know, how they feel about it. And
So it's during lunchtime, and we all used to meet in the cafeteria with other patients. So there was about 20 people in the cafeteria during this time. And I recall one time where you were teaching me how to grasp a glass, and instead of using a big old long straw that came to your mouth, and you sipped it. So my task for that day, and I can remember like it was yesterday, it was trying to grasp that glass and hold it and bring it up to my mouth, but I could not grasp that glass, and the glass was not a plastic cup or anything like that. It was just a glass, and I got so frustrated that I recall with my hand, I backhand that glass, and that glass went across the room, shattered all over. The entire cafeteria got quiet, and everybody's looking at me, and I'm just frustrated as can be. How do you handle situations like that, where somebody like myself just lost complete control of that?
well, the room was quiet. That was the first way they dealt with it. We
Yes,
all dealt with it.
Absolutely.
Maybe ask you if you wanted another one.
Sure.
With a straw this time.
Right.
Understanding, not to be angry about it. That's very understandable that was frustrating that you couldn't do that. And that's okay. You know
what? It's okay. The sun's going to come out tomorrow.
Exactly.
And, you know, it's just part of life, and it's part of learning. And I definitely had a huge learning curve.
Right.
And I appreciate everything that you had taught me, because I probably wouldn't be where I'm at today without your assistance and your guidance.
Yeah, like that day, it's kind of like, did you want to talk about it? That's
Right.
just kind of a good opener.
Sure.
Or maybe we haven't worked hard enough on your tenodesis action, and that's,
Sure.
we'll work more on it, and no biggie, they can sweep up that glass.
What was your most satisfying part of your job as an occupational therapist?
Definitely the outcome. Just to see that the work that you and your patient have done together, and to see that they can do it now. And more so than my seeing that they can do it, I think even more satisfying is when your patient is pleased with their progress and they know they can do it, and they see the benefits. Why, now that I can dress myself, I don't have to rely on someone, or now that I can prepare a meal, I can feed the kids when I get home.
Sure.
And they see the results of what we've been working all these months.
Can you describe your best Ray Serta moment at Dallas Rehab Institute
Yeah,
that you can remember?
I wanted to come up with a really ornery, funny story or something you did that was so unlike you, but all I could think of was the positive things because there were so many. You set such a good example. As a 16-year-old, you were usually the youngest or close to the youngest in the rehab during your time. For sure in your room. I mean, that room had such a reputation.
Correct.
I think your experience in your short 16 years as an athlete, as a leader in your school activities, academically, you already had those traits to really set an example for the other patients. I think as a 16-year-old, you were setting an example for patients older than you, which is a very memorable moment.
Well, I appreciate that. You know, I was in that ward that had all those other spinal cord injuries, and I was the youngest.
Yeah.
And so I could, you know, we all learned off each other, drew off each other. And I know how difficult that was. And, you know, one of the best moments, or one of not the best moments, but one of the moments is at DRI, which is Dallas Rehab Institute, where I stayed at, was, you know, getting to interact with all the different types of people that were there at the facility, and that no one injury was the same. You know, in my book called The Life I Didn't Expect, Facing Adversity and Winning, I write about all those characters that I roomed with. And the only thing that I wish I would have been able to do now, 40 years later, was kept in touch with them. And I never did that. And but all those characters had all different personalities, and we all were struggling, and we're all going through the same adversity of, you know, just trying to overcome our injuries and try to get back in society. And I think what you guys did tremendously was a well job done, and I'm really thankful and appreciative of that. Sheri, can you describe one moment, I guess, as an occupational therapist, that would you say was, what is the most important thing to you as an occupational therapist for that individual to, once he's leaving or she's leaving, can learn from, like maybe 20, 30, 40 years down the road? Is there any one thing?
One thing?
Well, I'm sure there's probably several things, but if there was any one thing that they could learn from that you had taught them, that never give up or continue to strive to be the best you can, you know, any encouragement?
I think what you're saying is very true. I mean, it's going to be difficult, and everything is not going to be a success. And that's okay. That's okay, as long as you are willing to keep at it and look down the road of where you want to be and whatever it takes to get there.
Sure.
And rely on your support system. Hopefully you have a good one or some part of a good one, and rely on it.
Correct.
You were so fortunate. Yeah.
I was very blessed, and had I not had my strong family support and families and friends,
Right.
and there's no way I would have been able to get through that ordeal that I
Right.
got through 40 years ago, and spent those 5 months at that rehab center. I learned very much. I learned. I grew up very quickly.
Yeah, you did.
Is what I can say. So, well, that's all the questions that I have for you. Is there anything that you could tell our viewers or listeners that are maybe going in the medical field of becoming an occupational therapist, that one recommendation you would give to them or one advice you could give to them?
Go for it.
Go for it.
I think I'm very partial to working in rehab. There's so many areas that an occupational therapist can work in, and I'm not familiar with many of them. You wouldn't dare put me in a pediatric unit, for example. But working in rehab is extremely satisfying, and I would encourage them to definitely look into that possibility, but there's many areas, so.
Well, Sheri, that's all the time we have, but I appreciate you being on this podcast, Rolling with Ray. Should you have any questions or any comments, please don't hesitate to contact me at raysertabook@gmail.com or visit my website at www.thelifeididn'texpect.com. You can also follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and of course on my YouTube channel called Rolling with Ray. Thank you so much for watching and listening to my podcast. I look forward to inspiring you, my viewers, on my next podcast. Thank you so much.